Good morning. It is Thursday, the 28th of May, and we are reconvening the General Fund Budget Committee for Clackamas County. Thank you all for being here this morning, and we have just a few moments, about 10 minutes at the most, or maybe 8 minutes for general discussion. And I understand that Paul Savas, you would like to begin that. And then Drenda, are you watching hands again? Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you. I know yesterday I thought we would cover tab 2, and the reason it's important is there's a lot of data there that will help shape our discussion. So obviously we can't cover all of tab 2 this morning, but I do want to draw your attention to page 5 of tab 2. And we kind of touched on this yesterday when it regards to FTE. I really thought that the FTE or the hiring freeze would have, through attrition, reduced our FTE to a greater degree than is what's obviously on page 5 of tab 2. And that is, there has been a reduction, but not much of a reduction. And, so my question to a number of the presenters yesterday was, how many hires have you done in the last 12 months? And the last 12 months was the period in time in which we had implemented a hiring freeze with some approvals. And it looks like most of those requests to approve or refill those positions were granted. And that hasn't put us in the most favorable position. And whether it's, the point that Jim has brought up yesterday, I brought up last week, we've all brought up, is that, the retirements, the anticipation of perhaps people retiring because it's either the time or they don't want to go back to the workplace. But that's our opportunity for reductions. The only challenge with those that want to retire, that are up at the retirement age, is those are probably more senior positions, so that it's more complicated. But I do want to point out that our opportunity is right there. We still have not gotten back to the 2018, 2019 level of FTE. And I just want to remind you that that in our budget, if you remember the budget discussion in 2018-19, that's when I kind of threw out the red flags and said, our forecast is wrong. We can't do this. And we couldn't even do the 2167. I think that's pretty evident today that we need to find a way to get the whole of the boat smaller and ultimately patched. And I don't know who thinks that we can actually maintain the current service levels and what we're doing today. If there's someone who has a forecast or has a path to be able to do what we're doing today in the future, whether it's next year or the year after or 5 years from now, great, show it to me. I just don't see it.
Okay, let's see what the others have to say too. Okay.
Bernard?
Well, first off, you don't know what level those employees are that added back. You don't know whether they're desk clerks. You don't know any of that. So the count could be not as low as you think, but you don't know what those people are being paid. But that's just to address that. I have other issues. Yesterday, I think the sheriff, usually when and you guys all know this, when we talk about the sheriff's budget, whenever he takes a cut, it's always jail beds and personnel. And that's political. For one thing, we at one point reached full hire, everybody he wanted, yet his overtime continued to grow. And so I've got to ask the question: if you've got everybody you want, why is your overtime continuing to climb? The other thing is, how many vehicles does the sheriff buy? Recently, we discovered that the sheriff was giving his used vehicles away to other people across the state, not following the process, for nothing or very little. And now I assume we have a policy that he has to go through the auction process. The other thing is, and Paul, you're a mechanic. you've been in the automotive repair business. Cars can last a hell of a lot longer nowadays than 120,000 miles. I mean, they're significantly different. Certainly the engines will last somewhere between 2 and 250. And I realize they do get a little more wear and tear, but 120 miles is pretty low. And Tom, you might have another opinion on this, but the other thing that's important to remember is that we spent money hiring a company called OIR to investigate basically the killing or the killing of a sheriff of a wife that happened. This is not the first time. It's more, there's been a number of times when we asked the sheriff after they did the review to please sit down with us, and we wanted with OIR to review, did you do what the 51 requirements that we asked? He refused. He refused to let us review that material. And you know, there is a consequence for failure to follow what the Board of County Commissioners desired, which was to review that he followed the 51 recommendations. Now, some of those have to be negotiated with the union, but that is a big problem as far as I'm concerned. The sheriff has never been open to letting us review how he spends his money. That is like, we give him the money, the door shuts. We don't know what his programs are. I know what some of them are, and I know some of them are absolutely fantastic. I don't know if his movie theater, his movie studio is producing videos for other people or not. There's a lot of issues. So I'm just hoping that you guys, you know, these Elizabeth, Gary, all the various departments have worked really hard to cut budgets, to focus their budget where it's most important. And I sure hope that you guys don't go against what has been recommended in the future. I mean, in this budget process, because it was not easy. And it was, folks really were careful. And just cutting the budget across would be a bad thing. Anyway, that's all I got to say this morning. Thank you.
Okay, I just would like to point out, we have only about 5 minutes before it's time for us to bring in our first presenter. So Drenda, and call on the next one.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Schrader?
So when we did the hiring freeze, was that a hard freeze or a soft freeze? Could somebody explain the difference to me between those two? My assumption was it was a hard freeze.
It was a hiring freeze as of July 1st, 2019, with an exception process. So if departments could demonstrate to me, and finance and human resources reviewed these applications as well. If a department could demonstrate that they were providing a mandated state or federal service that had to continue, that it was by law a position that must be filled, and how it was funded, then I would grant an exception. So that was the metrics I used with HR and finance. So I would say it was a medium freeze, not a full stop, but also not every position was approved either.
Okay. I was just saying because I think that the department heads need to have a reality check, and maybe people ought to take some notice from me because I never say anything like that. Okay. I think that we're in very desperate times. I don't think the sheriff's budget is sustainable. I agree with Jim. I think that we will be on a path to structural, whatever we call it, unsustainability. We will have a balanced budget. But with all the uncertainty that we're dealing with, quite frankly, with the state funding is going to go down. Everything that we have anticipated is up in the air. Elizabeth does a fantastic job, at least trying to figure out where the there is. But given the fluidity of what we're dealing with, I would really like to make it clear to all department heads, we're not playing games here with this, okay? And this is Commissioner Schrader, who never says anything like this. And I never throw people under the bus. But I am very, very worried that that kind of pushback, I understand it sounds like there were good sidebars with this, but that kind of pushback with what we're dealing with can be dangerous. Okay, and I will tell you right now, I cannot support the sheriff's budget as it stands. I just can't, because I know what it will mean for the rest of the county at this point. Now, I like the sheriff. I've always had a good relationship with him. I'm very pro public safety, but it will bankrupt other departments, in my opinion. So those are very strong words from me. I rarely speak this way, so I hope people take it to heart. I would also strongly suggest, as we move forward, that as the state cuts move ahead, I think we need to institute a no backfill policy. All right, because consistently in all the years that I have been here, the state continues to require us to do services without appropriate funding. This is not just us, it's the Association of Oregon Counties constantly sees this. We can't be everything to everybody without the funding. So yes, they will mandate services that we have to provide, but a lot of times, a good portion of the time, there aren't dollars following those mandates. And I don't think it's just going to be this county. I think 36 counties across the state are finally, given with what we're facing with all of our budgets, are finally going to say, no, we can't do this anymore. So that's just my cautionary tale for the morning. And I hope I didn't upset anybody, but I am very worried.
Thank you. Drenda, before we continue on with the folks with their hands up, I want to point out it's time for us to, on the agenda, roughly, to bring in our next presentation. But I also want to check with Elizabeth and see, is Jan or somebody taking notes about our discussions? So like the discussion this morning, so that we can capture those thoughts again tomorrow morning as we begin the deliberations?
Thank you, Chair Parks. Absolutely are. We have 4 folks that are actively taking notes. I'm not one of them. To help us really put these thoughts down and so we can address them succinctly tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so there's a couple of you that still have your hands up, and out of respect, we'll go ahead with that. But also out of respect, if we could please consider that the other presenters are ready to present, and that Dylan would be bringing them in momentarily. So, Drenda.
Yes, Mr. Stavis.
I do want to respond to constructively to Jim's comments. So, I grew up in the aerospace industry. A lot of my family worked in the aerospace industry. So I started my life working on the space shuttle program. So yesterday was a special day, though the weather kicked it off to Saturday, great. But I bring this up for this reason. I have friends and family that are still live in that area. And Jim, your point about how far cars go, they are still driving down there and refurbishing Crown Victorias from the 2000s, early 2000s, that have hundreds of thousands of miles on them. Okay, so it is doable. You don't have to have the latest and the greatest, right? So there are several examples. You can refurbish a car. If you do it properly, you can do it cheaper than to replace a car. So it's a matter of having the right fleet people to do that. So I just want to just put that out there. And I would love to see the vehicle count, the entire vehicle count for the sheriff's office. That's all I have.
Thank you, Paul. Drenda.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I'm just curious, couple things. I'm wondering if we have questions while it's going, if we put a question into the chat, is that a good way for us to save time here? That's my first question.
Good thought.
And then my second question is, if I'm hearing that there's concern about the sheriff's budget, I mean, what do we do? Do we give the sheriff direction that this budget committee isn't comfortable? You better come back by Friday with different cuts, or what are our options? And then the other thing that I want to mention is, Commissioner Savas, I appreciate you bringing up, all the staff and the numbers and all of that, but it doesn't really help us because our only discretionary dollars are general fund, and most of our staff is in H3S. And then we have the budget, the sheriff's budget. And then of course, we all know transportation gets a lot of fees and other dollars. So we don't have a lot of discretion. And if we're going to really look at where we do, we need to look at what are the general funded positions and how does that look? So those are my three things. I think we could save a lot of time if we had a process and that somebody monitored the chat, and then have to answer it right away, but we could save time and be more efficient if we utilize it.
Well, I just want to make it clear.
If that's allowable in this budget process. I don't know if it is.
Yeah, so in tab 2, page 5, the FTE counts are listed by department. So most of them are not are H3S. They're listed. Tab 2, page 5.
Right.
There's over 500 employees in H3S.
Right.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I'm not discounting that, but that's not most of that. That's not a majority of 2,173.
All right, let's go.
Commissioner Hubbard?
So for the sake of efficiency this morning, could we, if there's additional information that staff has about how many people, how many positions were eliminated or whatever. And if I understand correctly, a lot of the ones that were eliminated were ones that are on the books, but they hadn't been filled in a while. And so the money was still in the budget. The positions went away, but that didn't necessarily mean a person went away, if I'm saying that correctly. Somebody,
You are correct.
I see you nodding. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. So those vacancies no longer show up on the budget, on the proposed budget. So I'm not sure that we would see an actual count, but I heard Elizabeth say, I think, that there was either 37 or 34 or whatever net positions that were eliminated from the entire budget. So I remember that but let's get more, if there is an opportunity for more refinement on that, let's get that so that tomorrow we can have that information along with the discussion. Because I also see that right now we have one more hand up to enter into this discussion, which is a little bit, it's a really good discussion, but it's also a little bit about what I was concerned about for the people that are presenting today and the listening audience, and that we stay on schedule as much as possible. So that's why I wanted to make sure also that our comments were being caught this morning so that we can have something that gives us that background so that we can have an informed discussion tomorrow morning on that. So we have one more, yes, we have one more hand up, Brenda.
Correct. Commissioner Harbison?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Parks. I will be brief. I just want to bring this to people's attention because it may be helpful in how we go forward. In the general fund, at $135 million budgeted and $65 million of that going to the Sheriff's Department, that still is about 50% of our general fund, just like it was last year. The next highest one is Health, Housing, and Human Services. That's 8% of our general fund. District Attorney is 8%, Juvenile is 6%, Assessor is 5%, Department of Transportation 4%, Debt Service 4%, Technology Services 3%, Business and Economic Services 2%, the Board of County Commissioners and Administration 2%, Finance 2%, Disaster Management 2%, and all others combined are 4%. You could take 50% of any one of those other sections, and that is not going to, in terms of our general fund support, and it's not going to have nearly the impact that, say, taking the same percentage out of the sheriff's budget, just to use that as an example. So when we go through this process, we need to understand that most of the other departments are not supported significantly by the general fund. That's the reality that we face. So as we go forward trying to figure this one out,
I'm going
let me finish, please. As we go forward trying to finish, work this one out, Ms. Comfort's job has been to figure out the glide path that we could use to get to a balanced budget while trying to do it without knowing what the income is going to be from the state and federal government, which is where most of the funding for those other departments comes from. So I'm inclined to agree with the member that said we need to follow Ms. Comfort's recommendations. That's what we hired her for, and understand that you could take 50% of Health, Housing, and Human Services budget from the general fund, and that's not going to make a big dent.
Got it.
I'll leave it at that.
Well, I want to reply that my concern is this. I understand that this discretionary is, they're not getting a lot from our general fund. However, my point is this: when the federal government dries up and the state dries up, are we or are we not going to use general fund to backfill those programs?
We can't.
That's why I'm asking us to think about that, because that is what's going to eat up the general fund. I understand that there are those other revenue streams. I get that. But we have had a policy in the past since 2003. If those monies dry up, okay, mandated or not, I mean, I guess mandated puts us in a bad spot where we have to push back hard. But frankly, we don't have the luxury right now of any general fund backfill when and if we lose the revenue from the state and the federal government. That's what I'm worried about.
And that's when the rubber hits the road.
Right.
Agreed.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for participating in that conversation. It's extremely complicated and extremely vital. So
yes, it is.
Just come prepared tomorrow morning, right? Yeah. So.